Welcome to Achieving Student Outcomes Through Cooperative Learning. Section 3, Part 3, Introduction. We ended our last session by introducing interpersonal skills as it relates to the 3D research lesson, Model Lesson. Any of the interpersonal skills you have named can be taught to your students, and many of them are specifically labeled in this course. You will be learning in detail how to teach these skills to your students. Students don't know how to work in groups. Life would be easier, perhaps, if we didn't have to teach them to interact in a positive way with each other. But we do. When you are teaching the interpersonal skills, you need to begin with PALS. You can do this in starters. We participate, attend, listen, and stay on task. Beginning this way works well because PALS concepts are easily explained and easily understood by most students. You can then build them into starters when you first begin cooperative learning in your classroom without actually calling them PALS. We recommend that you do 15 to 20 starters in your classroom over about 3 weeks without specifically mentioning PALS. You would build the skills into the directions to give for the starters. For example, for participate, you might give directions such as the tallest person goes first and the shortest second. For attend, you might tell them to sit knee to knee and lean forward. For listen, you might request that each person take a turn speaking. For stay on task, you might say, let's get started quickly today. When you build in your expectations for behaviors which are the components of PALS, you begin to teach the interpersonal skills. In approximately the 4th week, again, the timing is up to you, you would present the concept of PALS as a group norm. You would put up a poster. You might lead the PALS pledge and explain to students that whenever they work in groups of 2s, 3s, 4s, or 5s, they are expected to follow the group norms and look and sound like PALS. Next, you would do some direct teaching of PALS. At this point, you might start some 3D lessons. After a month or so, you would place students in more semi-permanent groups for 3D lessons. When you do, they can begin to polish their interpersonal skills as a group. You might begin by saying, your interpersonal skill for this 3D lesson will be PALS, and I will be coming around to see if you would like PALS. Once they seem to have the concept, you would isolate participate and discuss what it looks like and sounds like. Or maybe you would isolate attend. In other words, you would work through PALS one piece at a time. Later, when you notice students needing more specific skills during a 3D lesson, you would isolate an aspect of PALS such as respond to ideas or get started quickly. When you are teaching any of the PALS components or aspects, you give students permission to overuse the skill while they work in their groups. Explain how practice improves the ability to use the skill. Give them examples they can relate to, such as a basketball player who practices throwing free shots over and over, or a golfer who hits balls over and over. An ice skater practices jumps over and over, and in school we do similar math problems over and over until we know how to do them automatically. So you see, we can begin interpersonal skills with starters, add PALS in general, teach the PALS concept, teach the 4 components of PALS, and then focus on more specific skills. Please note that the timeline is only a suggestion. You need to play it by ear. There is nothing lockstep about this. If you decide to jump right in, do 3D lessons first, teach a sophisticated interpersonal skill, and you know it will work for you and your students, do it. If you are a beginning teacher and you only feel comfortable doing starters your first whole year, do it. Use your judgment. For the next few slides, It will be helpful to work with grade level groups. Look at Participate on page 78, where you will find a number of ways that you heard me build Participate into starters earlier in the course. Please form triad grade level groups. On page 78, under Ways to Communicate Participation, use the examples to help you list ways you can communicate participation for your grade level. Please post your responses to PALS in Canvas Modules, Section 3, Part 3, PALS. Under Attend Physically and Mentally, you see a list of ways I built Attend into starters we did earlier in this course. Individually, write in your own words how you would explain Attend physically to your students. What would you say exactly? Share in your grade level groups. So please remember to post responses to PALS in Canvas Module Section 3, Part 3, PALS discussion area. Under Listen on page 79, you will again see some of the statements I made during starters when I asked you to listen. Individually, write how you would explain listen at your grade level. Please share in your grade level groups. Remember, please post your responses to PALS in Canvas Modules Section 3, Part 3, PALS. The last one is stay on task. Again, here are some statements you heard me make that asked you to stay on task. In your grade level groups, list ways you could introduce this concept. Be sure to record your responses. Please post your responses to PALS in Canvas Modules Section 3, Part 3, PALS. Please turn to page 80, Direct Teaching of PALS. On the 3D lesson schematic, circle Interpersonal Skill under Direct. We are going to isolate and practice how to teach interpersonal skills to your students. Read Direct Teaching of PALS and what it means to be PALS on page 80. When the term components of PALS is used, we are referring to participate, attend, listen, and stay on task. We also talk about components of inviting PALS, which consist of inviting participation, inviting attending, inviting listening, and inviting staying on task. Therefore, there are 8 components altogether, 4 components of PALS and 4 components of inviting PALS. When the aspects of the components of PALS or aspects of the components of inviting PALS is used, we are referring to breaking down any of the 8 skills further. For example, 2 aspects of participate, a component of PALS, are share appreciation and give ideas. 2 aspects of inviting participation, a component of inviting PALS, are check for agreement and seek information and opinions. When I am teaching my students about PALS, I might hang a poster, such as this one. When setting up cooperative learning, teachers may choose to teach different parts of PALS by isolating and teaching an interpersonal skill for a 3D lesson. To review, teachers can require PALS behavior in general. This is done when students work on being PALS as the interpersonal skill chosen by the teacher, without working on any one specific component. After teaching PALS in general, you would move on to teaching the meaning of each of the PALS components. You can teach one component of PALS, such as participate, attend, listen, or stay on task, as the interpersonal skill for the day. You would teach what it means to participate, attend, listen, or stay on task. Then, when you observe, you would look for behavior indicating that students understand and can perform it. Or you can choose a specific aspect of one of the components of PALS. For example, one aspect of participate is to give ideas. You would build a T-chart with your students for any aspect of the PALS components, just as we did for inviting participation in the 3D lesson on cooperative learning research. In other words, you start with a more general approach toward PALS and then get more and more specific about the interpersonal skills you want your students to learn. Please turn to page 81, Examples of Aspects of Participation. You see examples of 2 T-charts for aspects of participation. When students are sharing appreciation and giving ideas, they are participating. Please turn to page 82, Inviting PALS. There are 2 focuses to PALS. The first focus addresses each student's need to participate, attend, listen, and stay on task. The second focuses on students interacting more interpersonally with their group members by inviting others to participate, attend, listen, and stay on task. In other words, the first emphasis on interpersonal skills focuses on the individual watching his or her own behavior. The second focuses on inviting a change in behavior in other group members. This is a new level of interpersonal skills to add to our timeline after students understand PALS. You also have a copy of a new PALS poster on page 82, where it lists both types of PALS. With the invitational emphasis on PALS, we are adding new group norms. We don't just participate ourselves, we invite our group members to participate too. It becomes each member's job to participate, attend, listen, and stay on task, as well as invite group members to do the same. Therefore, each member has 2 responsibilities. Quickly read through what it means to invite PALS on the bottom of page 82. When you are working on inviting PALS, you have 3 choices. You may begin by concentrating on inviting PALS in general. You can focus on one of the 4 inviting PALS components, such as inviting participation, inviting attending, inviting listening, and inviting stay on task. Or you can focus on an aspect of one of the inviting PALS components, such as check for agreement. Turn to page 83, Direct Teaching of Inviting PALS. Here are 2 of the ways that you could invite PALS: check for agreement and seek information and opinions. The responses on both of these T-charts require students to focus on the behavior of their group members. There are many more such invitational interpersonal skills. These are just 2 examples. Read Direct Teaching of Inviting PALS silently to yourself. Stop just before Miscellaneous Interpersonal Skills on page 83. Some interpersonal skills do not fit under the PALS or Inviting PALS models. When you teach interpersonal skills that don't fit, you use the same method. You build a T-chart. You teach these other interpersonal skills when you notice that students need them or if they are task appropriate. For example, you might observe that students are saying, "Hey, you," or using other inappropriate names for fellow group members. To meet such a need, you would teach the interpersonal skill, Use Names, which requires students to call group members by their first names. You would build a T-chart that illustrates what it looks like and sounds like when students call each other by their first names. If you were to see students providing others with answers they should be finding on their own, you would teach the interpersonal skill, Help Others without giving the answer. You would build a T-chart with students so that they know what the skill looks like and sounds like. Please read Miscellaneous Interpersonal Skills at the bottom of page 83. Please turn to pages 189 through 195 in the appendix. You will notice that on page 189 are 4 T-charts for the components of PALS. The words that your students might suggest may not be the same as those shown on these charts, but these are examples of what they might be like. Notice that sounds like examples are always written as quotes. You want to record on the T-chart the exact words your students would say when practicing the interpersonal skill. The looks like should be a description of physical behavior you would see. On pages 190 and 191, you see the components of PALS broken down into aspects. On page 192, you have T-charts for the components of inviting PALS, followed by pages 193 and 194, which list aspects of those components. Then, on page 195, you have charts for miscellaneous interpersonal skills. You have a lot of choices here. By the middle of the semester, you would be able to choose from any of these. As we have said before, you usually start out with PALS in general and work toward more specific skills. However, if you have a lot of trouble with students arguing in groups, you might start out with disagree politely. Please note that there are more interpersonal skills than are listed here. These charts are just examples of some of those that students typically need. You will discover which interpersonal skills they actually need as they work in groups and you observe them. Thus, you will develop your own T-charts for the skills they need. If you need to use any of these listed, you have an example of the kinds of things students could say and how they would look. If you are a new teacher, you can stick with PALS in general and build them into starters over a long period of time. Do not add other interpersonal skill training or even do any 3D lessons until you personally feel you can handle it. Please turn to page 84, Interpersonal Skill Choices. There are some of the interpersonal skill choices available to you when you create a 3D lesson. You can have students work on any of these interpersonal skills or others you may discover they need. Please let your instructor know if you have any questions. You may reach him or her in the Canvas discussions questions area or via Canvas inbox. Please turn to page 85, Interpersonal Skill Teaching Method. Quickly read numbers 1 through 5 for the steps in teaching interpersonal skills. If you do these 5 things, you have taught an interpersonal skill. Note that number 4 is optional. You may find that once in a rare while, you will have students who really need to have the interpersonal skill acted out. Younger children may need this type more than other students. Kindergarten teachers often use hand puppets to demonstrate. Another technique is to role play with another teacher or with a student. If you have older students, 2 students could demonstrate. Step 6 means to act with confidence, believing that students will use these skills and that the skills are important life skills. This is very important. If you convey a lack of confidence in students' ability to learn these skills or don't really believe students will see the value in them, they will pick up on your feelings. If you feel unsure, you will need to psych yourself up the first or second time you teach them until you have experience with students acquiring these skills. We will go through each of the 6 steps which are explained in more detail on pages 85 through 91. Let's do a quick check to see if you understand the 2 main criteria for selecting interpersonal skills. Number 1 is task appropriate. Number 2 is student need. How many had both right? How many of you had 1 right? How many of you had none? Some interpersonal skills lend themselves to certain kinds of tasks, and others are inappropriate in certain tasks. You wouldn't use disagree politely, for example, if your students were brainstorming or collecting ideas. If you have students doing something where there is controversy, then this skill would be task appropriate. There will be occasions when you will discover a need exists for a certain skill. Students will show you by their lack of attending, listening, or staying on task. Teach them the skill they need based on your observation of their behavior. You may observe, for example, that students are throwing out ideas in a brainstorming session and are getting no response from group members. You would teach them the skill of responding to ideas. So there are two criteria for picking which interpersonal skill to teach: task appropriateness and student need. This next activity will be posted to Canvas Module Section 3 Part 3 Interpersonal Skill Practice, The Compelling Why. Please read pages 86 through 88, Building the Compelling Why. Form your core groups. Read through the directions on page 88, Interpersonal Skill Practice, The Compelling Why, and then I will go over them with you. In your groups of 4, you will each choose a different interpersonal skill from the list. Make sure you know which skill each person has picked, so that they are all different. Working alone, choose a method for creating the compelling why. Give a current example, ask for a previous example, or ask for a future example. You have permission to look at the T-charts in the appendix on pages 189 through 195 to make sure you understand the focus of the skill. Then write out a specific presentation for the compelling why on page 89, the compelling why, and be ready to present it to your group mates. Write what you would actually say in 2 or 3 minutes. That's all the time a compelling why should take. Keep it brief. Give your presentations and debrief after each one. Each group member will tell the presenter what he or she liked about the presenter's compelling why and give one idea for making it stronger. At the conclusion, each group will create a list of what it learned from this practice to be shared with the whole class. You have approximately 20 minutes. Now that you had time to prepare your work, we are now asking for someone from each core group to present your compelling why information to the class. What did you learn? Please use and return to Canvas Module Section 3 Part 3 Interpersonal Skill Practice, The Compelling Why, to review another group's presentation and offer meaningful feedback. Please pause the narration until you provide feedback to another group. Whatever we say in our compelling why, we want to end with a segue into building the T-chart for the interpersonal skill. We might say something such as, you can see how important it is to check for understanding. We need to know how to use this skill because we are going to need it today in our group work. Read over the information on page 90, Build the T-chart. There are 3 pitfalls that can occur when you build the T-chart. You find tips here for avoiding them. In reference to tip 1, sometimes you have to prime the pump, quote unquote, because you get blank stares from students. In reference to tip 2, sometimes the suggestions students give for sounds like and looks like are incorrect. Some very caring teachers who don't want to make a student appear wrong will write an incorrect response on the T-chart. This is a dangerous practice because students will become confused. You will also be defeating your purpose. For example, a student might say, "Good job" for the skill check for understanding. Good job is a nice thing to say to group members, but it is not something students would say when they are checking for understanding. If you put good job on the T-chart, you are only confusing your students. There are 2 responses to incorrect suggestions by students. First, you can give them credit for situations where their suggestion would be appropriate. Second, refocus them on the skill you are doing today. For example, if a student gives the response "good job" for the interpersonal skill invite participation, you might say, "The response "good job" is appropriate, when practicing the skill of sharing appreciation. Or if you aren't sure how the student came up with his or her response, you could say, "Tell me more." The student will either realize it was an inappropriate response that doesn't fit, or give you a reason which may be correct from his or her viewpoint. The third tip is that the skill may be so verbal that it doesn't have a physical behavior and, therefore, you don't have many or any looks like to record. You will recall the T-chart we built together for invite participation for the 3D research lesson. I'm going to build another one for you now. I'll use an aspect of inviting participation. Check for others' understanding. Check for others' understanding is a different interpersonal skill than check for agreement. When you check for others' understanding, you want to know if everyone understands the information. When you check for agreement, you want to see if people agree with the information. Remember that tip 3 on page 90 mentioned that some interpersonal skills do not have many, if any, examples for looks like. Check for others' understanding is one of those examples. Save this chart. You will need it later in another activity. For this activity, please go to Canvas, Modules, Section 3, Part 3, Practice Building a T-Chart discussion area. The groups of 4 that did the compelling why practice will stay together for this next activity. Please turn to page 91, Practice Building the T-Chart, and read the directions. I will go over them when you finish. You will take turns building a T-chart for the same interpersonal skill that you used in the previous activity for the compelling why. One person teaches by asking for looks like and sounds like examples of the skill. The rest of the group responds. Alternate teaching and responding. If time permits, pick a new interpersonal skill from the list at the top of the page and go around again. Jot down any questions, concerns, or important concepts that need to be discussed with the whole group when the activity is over. This should not take more than 15 minutes. Now there is something I would like you to consider. Once in a while, participants will think certain responses listed on the T-charts in the appendix sound negative. An example would be when a student says, "I disagree," when responding to ideas. It is important to explain that students need to be taught an appropriate tone of voice when delivering such statements. Such a phrase delivered sarcastically will have a much different sound than when delivered with sincerity. We may need to role play the difference with students because it is important to teach our students to be able to say something like, "I disagree," appropriately. This is an important life skill. As much as possible, we need to phrase sounds like statements positively and use positive forms of body language for looks like. If you are familiar with the acronym SOFTEN from Building Communication and Teamwork in the Classroom, you would quickly go over the elements with your students. Also, teach them to drop the words but and however from the vocabulary. On the bottom of page 91, read the last 2 steps for teaching interpersonal skills, role play or practice, and believe in what you are teaching. Please turn to page 94, Direct Interpersonal Skill Review. I will read through this with you. Fill in the blanks as I read. Number 1, pick one interpersonal skill objective. You can work on PALS in general or a specific aspect of one of the PALS components. Number 2, announce the interpersonal skill and write it on chart paper. Number 3, build the compelling why for this interpersonal skill by generating people-centered reasons for why group members would want to use this skill. This helps students understand the need to learn it. Number 4, build the T-chart, collecting the sounds like and looks like descriptions. From this exercise, students learn the behavioral objectives of the skill. Number 5, give students permission to overuse the skill. Number 6, Inform students about how you will be monitoring during the group time to collect data on the interpersonal skill. Show them your observation form and tell students what you will be doing with the data you collect following their group work. Show them the debriefing statements to which you will be asking them to respond during the debriefing. So how did you do? Give yourselves a high five for a job well done. The rest of this session will be for you to work independently through the material. There will now be narrated PowerPoints on Canvas Modules Section 3 Part 3 to walk you through the rest of today's activities. Please be sure to post the activities in the discussion area or submitted assignment area before our next class. Remember, even though these activities are not graded, they must be completed to report your successful completion to your university partner. Immediately after this introduction, return to Canvas Modules Section 3 Part 3, the Cooperative Learning 3D Model. Your first video will explore the course portfolio, which introduces us to Assessment 5. Your second video highlights the do aspect of the 3D model. Your third video investigates the debrief aspect of the 3D model. Finally, we will review debriefing interpersonal skills. Don't forget to check off that you have completed all section activities, including your section reflection. Let the good times begin. If you have questions while you work, please call or email your instructor. This concludes Section 3 Part 3 Introduction. Please continue to Modules Section 3 Part 3, the Cooperative Learning 3D Model Course Portfolio.